Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Track 1, Care and Support for Your Kids, and this is sponsored by Horizon Pharma. We hope you enjoyed the morning break, sponsored by EMD Serono, and are ready to dive right into our first breakout session. My name is Anne-Marie Bingo, and I will be your host for these morning sessions. Once again, we would like to remind everyone that we are live streaming, and I would like to welcome our remote attendees to the session. As a reminder, we have our mobile app available, so be sure and download it to use some of our highlighted features, like the live questions and answers. And without further delay, I would like to introduce our first session of the day, Support for the Rare Disease Family, Caring for Siblings of Kids with Rare Diseases. This is presented by Elina Marchenko, Sibling Advocate for Dupe15Q Alliance, and Lori Leathers, Fragile X Advocate and Financial Advisor for 1847 Financial. Please join me in welcoming them.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're a small but robust group, I can already tell. I am here today to tell you my story, so I am going to just dive right in and tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to be here. And Lori will give us some strategies and some advice about planning for the future. So my name is Elina. I was born in Minsk, Belarus, in the former Soviet Union. My parents and I immigrated here when I was 5 years old in 1989. My younger sister, Anna, who had Dupe15Q, she was 1 at the time. And I remember everyone always commented on how calm my sister was. She looked like a doll, and when she cried, it was so quiet, it sounded like a little baby kitten. And I vividly remember my favorite pastime was sitting outside of her room and then alerting my mom or my grandma anytime she cried. This was before baby monitors. On our journey to America, we stopped in Italy for a month where we finally had access to good health care. And the doctors made very clear that my sister was somehow developmentally delayed. My parents actually, even though we were on our way to the US, they contemplated staying in Italy because that was really the first time that someone gave them some kind of answer and acknowledged that she was delayed. Eventually, though, we arrived in the US and knowing no one, not speaking the language, and they were trying to navigate figuring out how to settle here, and also had my sister who needed extra care and attention. So my mom took her to the hospital every single day for different kinds of testing and experiencing doctors that she didn't even know existed. In the Soviet Union, you were kind of just a doctor. So this was a whole new world for them. Finally, it was suggested that we do a genetic test, and that's when we discovered that there was actually a name for what she had. Not that that was particularly helpful at the time, this was pre-internet, but she was diagnosed with Dupe15Q. It's a very rare disorder. It affects a little over 1,000 people that we know of all over the world, and it affects the 15th chromosome. It's a duplication. So I remember sort of when I was little and this diagnosis came down, I had absolutely no idea what it meant. I was 8 or 9 years old, but I knew that my sister was different. So I clearly remember an episode on the playground. She and I were playing, which consisted of me playing and her running around wildly, trying to grab at swings, at people, at toys, at sand from the sandbox. And I remember that there was a grandfather with his grandson, and he kind of whispered to his grandson, "Oh, don't go near her. There's something wrong with her. Don't go near her." And that has sort of stuck with me. I was so heartbroken and speechless at the time, mostly because I personally didn't think there was anything wrong with her. I'd grown up around her, and I knew that, while she was different, there was a lot of things that she did well. She knew all the Barney songs. She fell asleep on her tape recorder sometimes because she listened to children's versions of all these songs, and she would make you sing them with her. And he didn't care to know anything about her. He just kind of looked at her and judged her. And that's when I remember sort of realizing that there were people in the world that were like that. And as a child, that's particularly heartbreaking. So at the time, I was 8 years old, and I didn't know what to say to him or how to act, so I didn't do anything. But I remember it opened up something in me to do and say something. And I found myself as an adult, when I was navigating this world, I would think back to that moment and think about all the things that I would say to that grandfather on the playground. So as I got older, taking care of my sister became more and more difficult because she was also getting older. She sort of in her teen years, she had her own form of rebellion. She never really developed mentally past 2 or 3 years old, but she had great physical capacity because she carried around a giant stack of magazines at all times. So she had really good upper body strength. So she's forced to contend with. So it got to be sort of more and more challenging. We would go to Target and she would grab at Doritos and she would sort of scream at the top of her lungs if you didn't give her the Doritos and lie down and just refuse to leave until the Doritos were acquired. And to the outsiders, I know it kind of probably looked strange because she looked completely normal and she was on the floor kind of banging her arms and legs wanting Doritos. My brother was born when I was 13, and she found her new playmate and fell in love with him. But he instantly kind of became a target, too. Because they were sort of on the same developmental age, they vied for the same things, like computer time, like toys. So he had an entirely different relationship with her than I did. I'm happy to report that he actually now attends Caltech around here, and he's only slightly quirky because of his upbringing. My mom would often rely on me as the older sister to help care for my younger sister. She would count on me to babysit a lot while she would go grocery shopping or run errands. And this was particularly difficult because my sister constantly had meltdowns, and she and my brother would fight. I struggled to kind of balance growing up and pursuing my own interests with my responsibilities to my family. So I felt guilty, I think, anytime that I wanted to leave the house for something frivolous, because I felt like maybe I should be home. I didn't really apply to colleges outside of our immediate area, so I guess I never know if I would have gotten into Harvard. I like to think that I would have. I ended up going to Northwestern University, which was 30 minutes from my parents' house. And in college, I really kind of, I became more closed in because as you get older, you kind of have time to reflect and think about the things that are happening around you. And I felt like I didn't make many friends or join too many clubs because my reality was a little bit heavier than everyone else. And you kind of maybe don't want to let people into that because it is so heavy. But on the other hand, it's such a big part of who you are, so you want to talk about it. So finding that balance was hard for me, and it wasn't something that I could ignore because it was so ingrained in me, my whole experience, growing up with her and taking care of her. So I kind of felt sometimes like I was torn between two worlds, and there was pressure to do everything well and live a meaningful life, but yet I had this sort of responsibility that I wasn't sad about, but at the same time it was difficult. So that sort of dichotomy, I've struggled for years to find the right words to describe it. I'm sure that some of you have felt something similar or have witnessed that in your children. So when I was in high school, late high school, college, I started thinking about the future. And that was sort of a scary, daunting kind of proposition. Most people sort of feel hopeful for the future and look forward to it. But for me, I was nervous. I started looking into residential placement. Because of my parents' language barrier and the fact that they were sort of just exhausted with their everyday life, they weren't really thinking about it, but they knew that residential placement was a good option after she finished high school and wasn't able to receive services from our school district. I applied for funding from the state of Illinois. I was a one-man operation, so I feel like I did a lot of things wrong at the onset, and I was very earnest, and I laid my case out as honestly as I could, and I was denied many, many times. So it wasn't until I got my local and state representatives involved that her case was escalated, and we were finally approved for funding. We moved her into a residential facility. It was a single-story family home in a really nice neighborhood, and there were 5 other women who lived there full-time, and it was like a dorm. I called it the dorm. So when my sister was finally situated, I sort of opened my eyes to all of the things that I wanted to do, and I realized that I really wanted to try living away from home. And for the first time, I didn't feel sort of racked with guilt in order to pursue that. So I moved to New York from Chicago, and I started working in a really important, life-changing industry, reality TV. I worked on The Real Housewives of New Jersey, so about the farthest away sort of thing that you could think of. Until there was a storyline where, if any of you watched this show, Jacqueline has a son with autism. So obviously she ignored all of my advice about how to pursue that storyline for years and years, but that's neither here nor there. So when I was sort of reflecting back on all of that in New York, I still felt that guilt, the guilt of being away, the guilt of doing something for myself and pursuing something for myself, because I always had this need to be perfect. It was always like this survivor's guilt that I was kind of racked with, because while I was free to pursue all of these opportunities, my sister would never have a chance at a normal life. So I felt sort of doubly pressured to make the best out of it, make the best out of every moment. So I know that this is something that other siblings also feel. So when I was living in New York and working on Housewives, my sister passed away. It happened very, very suddenly. She was 22 years old, and she died during a seizure. A lot of dupers, which is what we call people with DUP15Q syndrome, they experience epilepsy, and we're now learning, because of the research that has occurred since she was first diagnosed in the 90s, that dupers don't live very long. They have a high chance of dying from epilepsy and experiencing SUDEP, the sudden death. So needless to say, this was a very, very difficult sort of realization that she was no longer here. It was, in some ways, it added this new layer of guilt, because on the one hand, I missed her so incredibly much, but on the other hand, the worrying about her that I did all the time was kind of over. So I had to navigate that new reality. So why am I telling you this story? Well, I'm telling you this story because since she has passed away, I have been able to reflect on my experience and become an advocate. And I'm an advocate for people with disabilities. That's one of my passions. But I also am an advocate for siblings. They're the ones who don't have a condition or disorder or disease, but they're still affected in a really profound way. my advocacy culminates in me telling you that it's so important as parents to have open channels of communication with your kids. There's no wrong or right way for caring a child with disabilities or planning for the future. Some families, they sort of turn inward and they experience the breadth of this alone. And others, probably like yourselves because you're here, seek a community and really take that support and support each other and help each other where they can. But there's also no right or wrong way for siblings to handle the situation. Some siblings want to take an active role in planning for the future. Others want and need to take a step back. Like me, I was very active. I wanted to be her guardian. We explored all of that. But my brother kind of wanted nothing to do with it. And that was fine because his experience was different. So I advocate talking to your kids about where on the spectrum they are and not judging where they are, because it could be me or it could be my brother on the other side. The parents just have to sort of help navigate that. The family unit is so vital and important because ultimately the immediate family is really the only ones who can understand what is happening in that nuclear family. And that is its own special, unique, and memorable experience. And I don't remember the exact days. I've forgotten a lot of the exact moments, but I remember how I felt growing up in my family. So that's something that your kids who don't have disabilities, they're feeling that every day, that environment that is created in the home, that all of you sort of shape. There's really a need to talk to your children and talk to them often. It's a priority. I advocate something called family meetings, and I feel that family meetings are especially helpful in sort of coaxing those feelings and those thoughts out of every member of your family. So I do this in my own family now, but I think it would have been particularly helpful back then. So once a week we meet with my two sons. One of them is 8 months, so it's been particularly difficult getting him to participate. But the other one is 7, so it's beginning to work. We talk about what went well in our family the previous week. We talk about what didn't go well, and then we all have a goal that we're working on. So the goal could be as something as, my husband, he's been working on chewing less gum for the past 40 meetings, it seems like. And my older son, he is working on doing his homework right away when he gets home. And the baby is just working on sleeping through the night. That's really his big thing. And he's not making strides, I'm sad to report. But really, it opens up this channel of communication. And your kids, because they know that they have this family meeting, that's their forum to express their thoughts and feelings. So whatever they're going through with the care of their sibling, or somebody said something at school, or any number of things, that's really the time to talk about it. And if there's a specific time, you're more likely to pull those thoughts and feelings out of them because they exist, even if they appear strong and resilient, because one thing that having a sibling with a disability does, it teaches you immense poise and compassion and strength. But that comes at a cost, and you have to talk to your family about it. They're really the ones that will know what you're going through. So the inner sanctum, your home, that's the most important place, and that should be the safest place to talk about these things and to talk about the future. And working with the Dupe 15Q organization, I was able to run 2 sibling workshops at our last conference, and that's what really gave me a purpose and made me realize that this is so important. So I'm sharing my message here today, and I hope that you heed my words and you take sort of some nuggets of what I say and implement them in your own families as you think about now and also what will happen in the future. So thank you.
Thanks, Elina, for sharing that very personal experience, which I think is invaluable. I have a bit of a different perspective. I am a mother of 2 children. They both have the full mutation for Fragile X syndrome, if anybody's familiar with that. But being that it's an X-linked condition, my son is really the only one that's significantly impacted, and he does have an intellectual disability. He's 16 years old, and I also have, we'll call her neurotypical for all intents and purposes, a 15-year-old daughter. So I can relate to a lot of the things that Elina had mentioned during her talk, and thinking about my daughter's experience. And my daughter is definitely on the side of Elina's brother in this situation. She's made it very clear to me that she does not intend to, be my son Gabe's caregiver throughout his lifetime. So, and I definitely respect that. So again, there's so many issues, and Elina was very much able to touch base on those from a first-hand position, that the challenges of a sibling that is neurotypical and has one with special needs. And I'm just going to, I'm here really to talk about the big picture and some of the legal and technical things for you to think about for future planning. But first, I just want to piggyback off of what Elina had mentioned from the personal perspective, and focus on one thing that is very positive that I've noticed about my daughter already, is that she has been able to become a very tolerant, accepting person of those that are different. It's been a long road for her. She recently, for example, just asked me to point her in the direction of a counselor, which I was very proud that she admitted that she would like to speak with someone, because I know one issue, it can be very difficult for the siblings to maybe speak to their parents who already, like Elina mentioned, they already feel that, okay, well, they're being burdened enough. There's so many things that they're responsible for, and I need to be the strong one. So I was very happy that she admitted that she would like to speak with someone. And that's only been going on for about 5 weeks now, but it's amazing. I don't know what's going on during these appointments, but afterwards, my daughter is extremely positive, happy, helpful, supportive. So it's been life-changing for her. So definitely, let them know that that's okay if they need to speak with a third party, for example. And I also just wanted to mention that one-on-one time with each child is very, very important. That was, I think, one of the main struggles that my daughter was experiencing, was that she just felt left out, and I knew that because basically our day would be dictated around my son Gabe and what his mood was that day. If she wanted to go, I don't know, to the mall or to Target or something like that, oftentimes that just wasn't going to be possible because Gabe was not in a good mood. He has some behavioral issues, and he likely would refuse to even go. And if he would go some days, there would just be a total meltdown, which I grew able to withstand those situations very well as an adult, and just kind of ignore people that were staring, because again, he looks totally neurotypical also. So it was hard for people to understand when he'd be cursing at me and hitting me and or his sister in public. So she started to withdraw at that time, and then what I found, which was such a wonderful thing, and that Elina alluded to also, was a residential school for my son. Something that I thought I would never approach, because I figured he'd just live with me forever, and I would be totally fine with that. However, things change during teenage years for any individual, and so when he became bigger and stronger and hormones kicked in, his outbursts were very dangerous to myself and my daughter. I'm a single mom at this point. So, and I didn't want him to be put in a residential situation that was quote-unquote punitive, which I found a lot of the places that I explored to be. So I was thinking for a while, this is just not going to be an option, and struggling with what I could do. When I was at an autism conference a couple of years ago and came across a wonderful school called Camp Hill Special School. They have locations throughout the nation, and my son now for the past 2 years has been a residential student there. Fortunately, it's only like a half hour from where I live, so I see him every other weekend and holidays. So, I still feel he's a very much, involved part of our family. He's so much happier because he is supportive by just constant engagement in activities and things that I couldn't do for him as a parent at home. I wasn't able to keep him occupied. He would spend a lot of time on his iPad and watching videos, things like that, which is fine to some extent, but I knew his potential was so much more than that. And this school has been able to bring that out in him. So once he went to this school, it gave my daughter and I a much better opportunity to bond. And I think for the first time, she started to realize what it's like not to necessarily live 24/7 with a sibling with special needs. So it's been a win for all of us. And my goal has always been to just make sure that my children are as happy as they can be and meet their full potential. And I really believe that that's possible now in this situation. So sometimes, residential living can be a very positive thing. You just have to find the right place. And I wanted to also just share a couple of the more technical things and legal considerations for people to think about when you're doing planning for your neurotypical and your child with special needs. So there are different legal and financial paths that you should consider, and that's why I got into what I do now, which is special needs planning. I have a science background, so financial services was not in my thought process, but when I realized that this is a very real need for families and that people don't know about how to transition their child from when they're in the school system, which is kind of the easier years, believe it or not, because the services they get are an entitlement. But once they turn 18, they have to be eligible for supports and services. So things that you should consider let's start with your potentially your child with special needs, is seeking legal counsel through an estate planning attorney that is very well versed in creating special needs trusts and working with families of loved ones with special needs. And I'm going to give you the name of an organization called the Special Needs Alliance. You can just look that up online and then find people that are professionals in your community that have met the credentials and have been accepted into this organization, because you want to work with someone that understands the nuances of working with a family with a loved one with special needs. So for that purpose, you want to consult the estate planning attorney to do your wills. So important, because even if we don't have loved ones with special needs in our families, we should all have wills as parents. Otherwise, the state and the government will have one for you, and that's not something that you would probably choose for your children and their future. So make sure that you get your wills. A special needs trust is also an incredibly important document, because that document is going to protect your child's eligibility for government and other supports like medical assistance, waiver programs if they're eligible, once they turn 18 and into adulthood. Because while, again, these things are an entitlement while they're in school, at 18, there's a very important asset test that has to be met. And that is that your child with special needs can have no more than $2,000 of assets in their name, or they're just automatically not eligible to apply for waivers, medical assistance, SSI, SSDI, for example. And those things, you can be a millionaire, but if you don't have medical assistance and you don't have, you haven't jumped through these hoops for your child, they're just going to be locked out of services. It's just a requirement. They're going to say, do you have medical assistance? Okay, then you can, seek these additional services and waivers and supports. So the special needs trust can just be created, and nothing has to be done with the trust. It's just a piece of paper, but the trust is there so that when you do have money to supplement your child's future, it'll be available when you need it, and it's protected. It's creditor protected. You don't want to leave it to your neurotypical children, because even though you have the best intents and purposes in that case, and they may too, just for example, they could make financial decisions that aren't responsible, and use that money for emergencies that they encounter, or if they're married and become divorced, then those assets are, going to be divided between, them and their ex-spouse, for example. So the trust is a very critical document in protecting assets for your child's future. And then another thing in terms of the legal perspective that you want to determine with the help of estate planning attorney is the decision between guardianship versus powers of attorney. And just some important points about the two of those things. Powers of attorney they're going to grant you to be able to assist and support your loved one in making financial and healthcare decisions. So it's not that you're taking over their decision-making process completely as you would be in guardianship, but you're able to support them if you think that they can't just totally independently make decisions that are in their best interest. Powers of attorney are a lot easier and less expensive to attain than guardianship. So just be wary, because you really want to make sure that if you go for guardianship, that's absolutely necessary, and which it is in a lot of cases. But in those circumstances, you are going to a court proceeding and having your loved one with special needs being legally declared incompetent to make decisions on their own. So once that process is completed and they've been assigned a guardian, which might be, the primary caregivers as long as they're alive and well, it could be a sibling, like it sounds like, Elina, you were considering doing that for your sister. But determining who the guardian would be is an important decision, as well as just going to that legal process also, because once you obtain guardianship, it's very difficult to go back and say, well, now I think they have some decision-making capability, so I'd rather just go to powers of attorney now. It's not easy to undo that process, whereas if you choose powers of attorney and then decide later, oh, I think maybe guardianship makes more sense here, that's much more easier to pursue. So just some cautionary words there in terms of the legal considerations to make. And I wanted to also mention that some of the financial considerations. First of all, as I said, the special needs trust can be created at any time. It's just a piece of paper, and you want to talk with a financial planner that, again, is very well versed in working with families of loved ones with special needs, because special needs planning is very different than traditional financial planning, because you're not only thinking about the future of the caregivers, which might be two parents in this situation, but you're thinking about supporting the needs of your loved one with special needs throughout their adulthood, their lifetime, potentially. So it's really called a three-person retirement. You might hear that term. So people have to be aware of that. And as such, there's definitely different types of vehicles that are better than others to fund a special needs trust. And since most of us, while we're alive and well, we're going to care for and supplement the needs of our children financially, we really are thinking about, once we're no longer here as caregivers and providers, not only who's going to take over that responsibility and be the trustee of the trust, but also where's the money going to come from to support that individual's future. So most of us don't necessarily have a pool of money to just fund the special needs trust outright. So whole life insurance is a very good way to fund the trust, because most likely you're not going to really need that asset to be in the trust until you pass. And there's other very tax advantage benefits of life insurance, et cetera. It's going to be going into the trust tax-free, and then the distributions are taken tax-free, which is a huge plus, as opposed to other types of financial vehicles that would be more important to designate your neurotypical siblings as beneficiaries of, such as your 401k, your retirement plans, IRAs, all of those things, especially pre-tax accounts. You don't want that to go to the trust, because once you take the distribution, they're going to be taxed at the applicable tax rate at that time. So there's lots of advantages to life insurance, whereas your other neurotypical siblings, designate them beneficiaries of property, things like that. So that's something you just want to make sure too, because when you go to apply for SSI and medical assistance, they will look, and if you have your special needs child designated as a beneficiary in any of these other types of assets, then that's going to knock them out of eligibility also. Even though it's not in their hands yet, they're designated as a beneficiary. So very important to speak about your family with too. If anybody anticipates leaving money to your child with special needs, have them leave it in the name of the trust, okay, which will have its own social security number, tax ID, et cetera. So I think that pretty much covers most of what I was going to speak to. I also just wanted to mention a couple resources that I just came across that can be important for families. Again, you can go online and look for what's called the Sibling Support Project, which supposedly is the first national program dedicated to lifelong and ever-changing concerns of the millions of brothers and sisters of people with special needs. So again, the Sibling Support Project. And they publish books, host support groups, forums, and do workshops across the country. The Friendship Circle is an organization. If you're not already part of that, that's a good one to sign up with, because they've compiled a list of 10 helpful books for siblings of loved ones with special needs. They also have a very nice Facebook page if you're on Facebook. So they post a lot of very helpful information in general. And they have a newsletter also that you can sign up for. And then finally, the Sibling Leadership Network. That is something that is for tools that give siblings the ability to advocate for themselves and their brothers or sisters, and also promotes the issues important to them and their entire family. So again, that one was the Sibling Leadership Network. And I know my daughter recently started watching a show, Atypical, on Netflix, and she loves it, and I started watching it also, and I think it really helps display like some of these ongoing issues that occur in families in those situations. So thank you very much.
Now we'll open it up for questions from the audience, and I'll bring the microphone over to you. This session is being recorded, so we need to make sure they can hear us.
Hi, my name is Penny. I have a son who's 4.5 with an ultra-rare genetic syndrome called ADNP syndrome, and he has a little brother who is 3.5. My son with ADNP doesn't play with his brother. He just does more independent play, and with kids in general. And it's hard for my 3-year-old who wants to play with his brother so desperately. He's compassionate in some situations, and with others, it's to get his attention. He knows he needs to take a toy away from him so that his brother will look at him and chase him. My biggest fear is that my 3-year-old neurotypical child will grow up with some balance of bitterness towards the situation. Do you guys have any suggestions that would lay a good foundation for compassion and for him to look at his brother as just his brother and not as someone who's taken attention away from him?
So this is something that first of all, I completely understand your situation, and I really, really sympathize with you. And I appreciate you noticing this, that it's happening, and trying to sort of find ways to work through it. They're still very, very young, so sometimes it's hard to work around that when they're so young. When you're older, you can communicate with your typical child and explain to him kind of a little bit better about what's happening. But for now, I think that I would say that individualized attention to each of them is important. If you show your typical child how you kind of play and interact and are with your child with special needs, and then also as not to only give attention to him, you do the same thing, like you do 20 minutes here, you do 20 minutes there. I found that to be particularly helpful when my brother was younger because he can observe that. And then if you have family friends and they bring their children over, which I know is sometimes hard to do in these situations, because the last thing you want is to like host a family and more children when it's already kind of chaotic. But if those children, sometimes children from who aren't there every single day, do show a little bit more patience and compassion because they have to be there for like an hour. So maybe him observing other kids and how they interact with his brother, and maybe it's in a slightly more compassionate and positive way than he normally does. That could help very much, and that would also give him positive playtime with other kids. So rather than sort of closing off because that's occurring, open it up to the world and see if that makes a difference, on top of giving sort of individualized attention while the other brother can observe that. So those are my two suggestions. I hope that helps. Thank you for asking that.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here today, for sharing what you have. I was anxiously getting here to attend this particular track because I'm a mother of 5. My youngest daughter has congenital generalized lipodystrophy, so it's a very rare autosomal recessive disorder that occurs in 1 of 10 million people worldwide. So before this world of rare, I just went to college. 18 years, 2 college degrees, had my children, and we just pretty much lived a normal life. When my daughter came along, I found that my children have to be particularly stronger than what you could ever imagine. But I'm just wondering about the family balance. We have the meetings and things like that, but they put up this really strong front, as you were saying. Are they okay, like they say they are? Do they understand? We travel every single month. We're gone for a week at a time, and I miss a whole lot. So
Well, first of all, 5 children, you're my hero. Second of all, just the fact that you're asking if they're okay means that you care enough to be in tune with them and their feelings. And I can guarantee you, with a mother like you, they have no choice but to be okay. Like, how else would they be? But it is sometimes that difficult place where you do feel like you have to present a strong facade because your parents are experiencing so much and just going through a lot of difficult experiences all at the same time. So Lori had suggested a third party as someone who can sort of bridge that gap. They don't have to break down in front of you, but it has to be okay to break down. my parents were a little bit more old school because they're immigrants, and nobody really talked about feelings. Nobody really had feelings in the Soviet Union. So it wasn't really okay to sort of show any weakness. But in general, I would say that it is. It has to be. So creating that safe space where they can come to you or they can come to each other and admit that it's difficult, and it doesn't make you any less of an advocate for your sibling. It doesn't make you any less of a supporter, of a friend, and it doesn't make you a worse son or daughter to your parents, but it only makes you stronger. So society really advocates self-care, right? You see it all the time. You have to take care of yourself in order to be able to take care of your children. And I think that applies, and that's a really good term to use for siblings. As long as they have interests that they're pursuing and they feel free to be who they are, and have the freedom to express those emotions, and see you expressing those emotions, because you also don't have to be strong 100% of the time. You know, if you kind of need to vent or you're having a bad day, they'll see that it's okay to express that and they'll follow suit. But I love that you care so much about them to ask that question of a total stranger, are they okay? And I'm gonna venture out. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, yes, they're more than okay. So.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My son has Cornelia-de-Lange syndrome, and my question is, it's kind of like both of you together, I guess, because my son is now he's going to be 16 in December, but he was placed in a group home when he was 12 because his behavior, the same thing as puberty, the whole thing. We just couldn't do it, and he was hurting his siblings, and that's where like I noticed that a lot, or who have spoken actually, all the siblings seem close together in age. He was 12 or 11 when his younger brother was born. So it's like a 11-year difference. So when he went to the group home, my son was like 15 months, and I was pregnant with my daughter. So when she was born in that March, he was already in his home. So when they were young, the other kids were a little bit violent, so I tried to like just wait to bring them, there. But now they're going to be 4 and, how old is she? Oh, 2.5. I try to bring them. I want to make sure that I don't want them to be like, just forget about him. I try to do as much as I can, like show pictures, like, oh, hey, who's that? And they're like, oh, it's Nick. But I'm like, is that going to be enough? Like, and you're a half hour, and it's easier for you. I'm 3 hours from him. It sucks. It's like, it's like you get emotional just even saying it. I don't want him to think I left him there and just forgot him, but it's 3 hours. It's a long trip, and I have 2 more kids. So I don't want him to feel like that. But I also don't, for a long time, I let those children, the younger kids, just, because I wanted to make sure he was good in his home and that he was safe, and I had issues with some of the houses. So I'm like, it's okay, they're young, but I can't say that forever, because they're not going to be little, because now they're going to school, preschool and kindergarten, and I'm like, okay, but how do I keep this together, but not let them just forget? Like, I don't know where, like, I don't want to do too much and be too pushy and be like that annoying mom, but I don't want them to just forget their brother, and I don't know if you have any advice for that.
Even though that's a different situation because of the age gap than I've experienced, but I think that the more that you talk about your son, like he is a member of the family, and just speak to them, like show them pictures, whatever it needs to be, and as soon as possible, I think that you can help bring them along and visit with your son. I think the better, because again, even though they're going to experience adversity and potentially see violent outbursts and all of those things, as long as we as loving parents can put it in context context and really explain to them what's going on and why. And I think that children, even very young, are able to understand and empathize with that. They'll grow up not knowing any differently and always understanding that your older son, he has different needs and he's getting his needs met in a very competent place. And I think that they'll be able to grow up putting that all in perspective and yet understanding and empathizing that he's still a very important individual to the family. He just simply has other needs that are met in a different situation at this point. I mean, just like my son, for example.
Do you have the ability to video chat with your son from his facility? So I would say that adverse experiences like Lori was referring to, they're a part of your children's reality. Even though your older son isn't there every day, that's still in their family. He's there. And there are benefits to having, a child with special needs because it gives you this sort of strength that you don't even realize that you have, but you go through life with it. So I think it's important to have him be a part of your reality as much as humanly possible and talk about him often, even though you don't know if it's appropriate or if there's a right time, or you don't want to confuse them because they're little and he's not there. But it's just important to make that the objective reality in your house and incorporate him as much as possible. So if you think he would react to something that's happening, you could say, oh, you know what he would say? He would say, or this is what he would do. Like, bring him up, remember him. And video chat with him is often, make it a whole thing leading up to it. Like, oh, we're going to video chat with your brother. It's so exciting. Let's show him this. Like, what are you going to show him next week? Like, are you going to sing a song for him? Or, like, make it a holiday in your house that you get to talk to him at a certain time. And, it is 3 hours away. That is a big chunk of time. So when you do make it out there, bring them. And also leading up to that, you can show pictures and tell stories, but he is a part of your family. And I know that you clearly think that it's important to keep him in your thoughts and in your family because you're even asking this question. So that would be my advice. But thank you for asking that.
I just want to share my side of the sibling. My youngest brother, Tanner, was diagnosed with Duchenne when I was 15 years old, and I was the oldest of 6. And my parents came home, and I realized we only had a certain amount of time, and we could have let that make or break us. And it was one of those things that we put, if we only had a certain amount of years, we were going to make sure those years are going to be the best years of his life. And through the years, as my brother transitioned and progressed, my parents, not forced, but we were all encouraged to take care of my brother. And it wasn't always my parents' responsibility. So now all 5 of my siblings, we can all shower my brother, take him to the bathroom. He's in a full-time power chair. We all can lift him in and out. So I would just say, though, through that, I've developed a love for my brother. I don't do it because it's just my brother now. I do it so my parents can take a break. When I go home, I sleep with my brother just so I can roll him over in his bed and get my parents caught up on their sleep. I think it's not, you're not the only person, and for kids, I think just encourage your kids that it might be tough and it's obviously a little awkward at times, but the bigger picture at the end of the day is it's that appreciation that now I go to MDA camp. All 4 of my siblings, we all go to MDA camp, and we're not counselors just for my brother, but for other kids, and we learn different special disabilities and things like that. So just encourage them to be involved, and even their friends who come over. No one could come over to my house unless everyone sat at the kitchen table and played with Tanner too. And through that, the friends have started fundraisers for my brother, have attended camp as well, where they gained an appreciation, and just those different things. Get your children involved, and through that, you'll meet other siblings that are going through the same thing, which helped me. I had a friend that knew exactly what I was talking about too, and I would have never met her if I never went to camp. So it's just those things. So, yep. Just wanted to add that in. Sorry, guys.
No, that's really awesome. And I do think some of the care things that you're talking about, the experience of changing her diaper her whole life because she was never potty trained, and kind of manhandling her when necessary, and just being near her when she was having a seizure. All of those things, it really does bring you sort of, it prioritizes your life, and it makes you a stronger, more well-rounded person. I will say that it's amazing that your family established that culture in the family because sometimes, that's not possible. It just speaks to the strength of your parents and your family unit. I hope that you adopt my brother and he can experience your brother, because that was certainly not the case with him.
Hi. Thank you for everyone for sharing your stories. And I'm with the Child Neurology Foundation, and every time I hear, we're all doing our best. So we're all doing our best. A lot of times we work with a lot of parents, regardless of what neurologic or genetic condition, they ask us about transitioning, not just find an adult doctor, but all of what I call big T transitions: social, education, community, et cetera. There's still, I feel like, a little bit of a stigma around group home, residential. I wish I could eradicate that from the world, because people do have special needs, and I think what you said was brilliant. Your needs are being met in a different way. He's safe there, he's happy there, and some people don't even get that opportunity because there is that stigma. So I was just wondering, from the perspective of getting people to think about it and be okay with it, and anytime you have to think about your own mortality, it's really hard. When I die, what happens to? But that needs to happen. So what do you tell people? What's the first place you refer them to? And I know it's probably state specific. I have a brother-in-law who's sort of undiagnosed. He's in his late 40s now, and I kind of ask all the time, what's going to happen to Ronnie? Have you guys thought about this? And it's a very uncomfortable subject because no one wants to talk to what happens when Granny dies and what happens to Uncle Ronnie. But I want to know, because it's going to impact my life too, and I want the best for him. So where do you even tell people to start? Where do you start looking?
Well, I think the sooner that those things are discussed within a family, the better, because think of the devastation to the child or the adult that is only known like one or maybe a couple caregivers their whole life, and then if that person passes or is physically unable to care for them anymore, their whole life is suddenly turned upside down and they don't have coping mechanisms. So, you're really doing a favor to your loved one by looking for alternatives and trying to make them as independent as possible, and or put them in a situation with the right supports as best you can. Just completely planning to just have, the primary caregivers, which are also often the parents, take care of that individual throughout their lifetime. It's just not reasonable. I mean, sometimes it happens and sometimes it might be appropriate, but you still have to just think about when that person is no longer there. So there are professional agencies, and like you said, they are specific, by region and state. But there's care management organizations, and I'm glad you brought this up also, because it reminds me that when you're thinking about a trustee for a special needs trust, or you're thinking about, guardianship, things like that, it doesn't have to only just be a family member. I think it's an important thing to have a family member involved because they know and love that individual personally, but it's also good to have a professional organization involved, and many of these organizations are founded by families for families. For example, there's one in Pennsylvania I know called Plan of PA, which is excellent. But there are other care management companies that are very involved, and you want to start getting them involved early so that they can start to get to know the individual, what their needs are, what their preferences are. So then by the time that primary caregiver is no longer in the picture, they can pick up more seamlessly. Same with other family members. So there's a document that's not a legal document, but that can be helpful just to start thinking about these future needs and putting together. It's called a Memorandum of Intent. And I can provide a template and make that available online. And it can give peace of mind to the family by saying that, just like, for example, if I tomorrow for some reason was not able to take care of my son or be his advocate, someone could pick up this document and know exactly where to pick up. What are his needs? What are the medications? What are his schedules, et cetera? And so the same is true when you're talking about a professional care management company that would come in and help support the needs of the individual. And it's also their job to find appropriate housing. And there's different options out there, and more parent groups are getting together to have like a group living situation with the needs and the modifications depending on the individuals involved in that home. So there is a movement toward that. So hopefully that's helpful.
Well, I'm sorry we've run out of time, but if you have any questions that weren't answered, if you could just submit them on the app, and Global Genes will try to get those answered for you. But thank you very much for providing everyone with such useful strategies. Thank you. And at this time, if you could jump onto the mobile app and fill out the survey that's on there, that would be great. You'll have 10 minutes to transition to your next session, so thank you very much.